Hello, welcome to Free Will, Science, and Religion. I'm Chandler Klebs, and today I'm here with George Ortega, Trick Slattery, Michael Walsh, and David Joseph. And today we're going to be focusing on coming to an accurate definition of free will. Because we often talk about the refutation of free will and why we don't have free will. But because people are still confused on the definition, and because it's always good to clarify what we're talking about, each of us can share our ideas of what we would have to be able to do, what it would mean in a universe where we imagine that people had free will. What would they be able to do, and is it even coherent to say that somebody could have done otherwise?
All right, well, Chandler, let me actually, we're basically going to contrast two different definitions of free will to see which is the most helpful in getting people to understand the concept we're describing. So the kinds of definitions that we'll present are valid. We're not questioning their validity. We're just trying to explore which is most useful to our purpose, to our mission.
Okay. So who wants to start with just defining the free will?
Well, again, let me start. All right. There are two, we're going to consider two different definitions of free will. And again, we're going to try to explore the strengths and weaknesses of each to see which is, which better serve our purpose. So the first definition is the idea that we could have chosen otherwise. You know, we have a decision in front of us. We could have, between A and B, we chose A, we could have chosen B. Okay, the second definition is simple causality because no, the definition is like free will is the ability to decide without anything. Actually, rather than causality, I think I want to go with the control. Without anything that's not in our control, compelling our decision. So, unless you guys want to introduce the causality as a third, because I think control, I believe we'll discover is the fundamental aspect of both the otherwise definition and causality.
Maybe we should talk a little bit about control. What does it mean to say that something is in our control or not in our control?
Well, I mean, like the example, like, persons in a restaurant, somebody spikes their drink, they go out and commit a crime, they didn't know about the spiked drink. We could say that behavior wasn't under their control because, something that they didn't even know about, compelled it. So it's basically just something, I mean, like if we can't control it, for example, if our decisions are made at the level of our unconscious, and we're by definition not even aware of the existence of our unconscious, then that would be another example of something that's not within our control, even though it may be part of us, deciding what we do for us.
Right. I think most people would agree that you can't be in control of something by any definition of control if you're not aware of it. But when it comes to things that we are aware of, do we have control over anything that we are aware of?
Well, again, the idea we're pretty much agreed on that we don't. That's why free will is impossible. So again, we're trying to distinguish between that. What is the best way to present this? Should we be presenting it like, in other words, when we define free will to audiences, should we go with like, well, free will is the ability to have done otherwise, or should we go with, free will is the ability to act, independent of things over which we have no control?
So yeah, so when we're talking about the word control, I guess some people can get confused there. Then that's kind of a problem, I think. Like for example, they might say that the steering wheel of a car controls uh, the turn of the car, or something like that, or controls the tires turn. So they'll use that type of control to say that we control things. Even so, I think what we really mean when we say control is that we don't have ultimate control. We don't have control over the variables that lead to our conscious decisions.
Absolutely, absolutely. If we need to use the word ultimately, definitely.
Right, and it's just kind of a way to, because you have compatibilists that they define words differently. So you have control, and that it can be used in different contexts. The same thing with free will. People redefine free will and make it a different context. So we have to kind of avoid those things that are going to cause confusion. And I think the control word by itself is a little confusing in my opinion. So I, I think it has to be qualified,
I agree. Ultimate
qualified of
control,
ultimate
absolutely.
control, or control over the variables that lead to your decisions. I think would be even more of a stronger qualification there. Um, in regards to the otherwise, I would say it's more than just the ability to do otherwise, but you have to have the control to do otherwise. You have so it's almost like you need the combination of both, because obviously you have people who postulate indeterminism, and whether that's the case or not is besides the point. If indeterminism is true, then we can do otherwise technically, but the question is that otherwise decision up to us? So it's otherwise, and whether that otherwise is up to us is it would be the first definition, I'd say. So we have the two definitions. One is the other, the ability to do otherwise that is up to us or of our own accord otherwise, and then the second definition is the conscious control over the variables that lead to our decisions, which I don't think we have either. So the question is, which one is, I guess, more appropriate? Um, and that's a little harder to determine, because I think you can kind of use both of those um, ways of talking about free will to help people understand why they don't have the free will we're talking about. Um, I think there's been studies that shown that people are given like an entirely deterministic scenario, and yet they still claim that people could have done otherwise. So when prompted of whether they could have done otherwise given an entirely deterministic scenario, they say yes to that. The majority of lay people. So I think that's one reason why I kind of like that otherwise definition. Anyone else?
Okay, yeah, Michael, David.
Yeah, I was just going to say I like the idea that they could have done otherwise. I think that's an easy one to kind of disprove. Well, maybe not disprove, but kind of get people to realize the problem with it. Yeah, I mean, I think the whole idea of control though is going to be a difficult one to sell, to be honest with you, because I'm still confused about it myself. So, I mean, what I would say is something along the lines of I don't know, you could drive incredibly carefully and you could get to where you were going and you'd be fine. But if you were to do it again and go back and you make a mistake, were you still in control? I mean, I don't. Yeah, I don't get it, to be honest.
Okay, Michael, what's your take?
Well, I would define libertarian free will as requiring at least three things. So I would define libertarian free will as the belief that we are in control of our will, our mind is causally effective, and in the same situation we could have done otherwise. So I would agree with a lot of you guys on a lot of stuff. So on the first point, if we're not in control of our will, if something else is, either some deterministic physical process or some indeterministic physical process, if we're not in control of our will, then I really don't think you can even make the foundations for libertarian free will even possible. And
No,
on
and
the
we're not
second
disputing
point,
that. Yeah.
yeah, on the second point, if our mind is not causally effective, if it's just some kind of epiphenomenon, if it's just like the steam coming out of the hot coffee and it has no causal effect on the coffee at all, then I think that would also rule out libertarian free will as well. And on the third point, if if it is the case that we could not have done otherwise in the same situation, if the universe is ontologically deterministic, then I think at the very, very, very least, libertarian free will requires some kind of indeterminism. I mean, determinism rules it out 100%, period. Now, you could argue, of course, that indeterminism doesn't allow it either, and I think there's plenty of good arguments for that. But at the very, very, very least, if the universe is ontologically determinate, fully deterministic, then libertarian free will is 100% false. So I would say it requires those three things, and I would say that on all three of those points, there's really good reasons to think none of them are the case.
Okay, Michael. So yeah, again, we're agreed on that. But what we're trying to like figure out is which is the best way to present the concept of free will. So like, all right, with presenting it in terms of like being able to do otherwise, I see two problems with that. One
Okay.
is the ambiguity of the, in what sense we're saying being able to do otherwise, because because I guess we're distinguishing between you know uh, theoretically and realistically. In other words, theoretically, we could have, done otherwise, right? I mean, conceptually, we could have, if we chose A, theoretically, we could have chosen B, but realistically, we could not have chosen B because of, the laws of nature and causality and all. So that's the first problem with that. The second problem is that, like, when we begin to explain why not being able to do otherwise prohibits our free will, I think we need to then revert to the concept of control. So in other words, like, it seems like the ability to do otherwise is a somewhat indirect way of refuting, or of refuting free will, or defining it in that sense. Whereas, like, when we talk in terms of control, we're we're addressing free will, more directly, without an intermediary step.
Here's the problem I see with the control scenario is somebody could technically say that if they couldn't have done otherwise, for example, they could still be in control over the decision that they did make, the non-otherwise situation. So they could still say that they have, like, for example, causal control over the decision that they made.
Right, but Trick, that's my point. My point is, like, in either defending the being able to do otherwise free will, or refuting it, I think we have to invoke control. So like, whereas if we go with the control immediately, then there's no second step. If we say, well, free will is the ability to, act without anything that's not in our control, compelling the action, then we don't have
So
to go to an additional step.
so
But
sorry, Trick, you go ahead.
go ahead.
On.
Okay,
Or
well,
maybe.
so as soon as you say that somebody couldn't have done otherwise, then it kind of, I think it kind of points to them not having the control to do otherwise. So I think it's automatically excludes the control part of it. They don't have the ability to have done anything but that one possibility.
All right, well, then let's explore. So why couldn't a person have done otherwise? How would you,
Well,
present
given
that refutation?
determinism, for example, in a deterministic scenario, they couldn't have done otherwise.
Right, but then when we consider causality, don't we have to, like, explain that in terms of in other words, why does causality refute or prevent free will? Because we don't control causality. The process is outside of our control.
Yeah, but if somebody magically thinks that some kind of causality can lead to an otherwise situation, then they can kind of think that causality leads to some kind of control. They can think that causality leads to them being able to decide whether they're eating chocolate or
No,
vanilla.
I agree with you. I agree with you. But again, like, to the extent that they make that kind of argument, it's still within the paradigm of control. In other words, like, they're still using control to try to defend their position.
Yeah.
I have something to say about this could have done otherwise because if you are to ask someone if they could have done otherwise, they might say, well, I could have done otherwise if I had wanted to do something else. If I had wanted to do otherwise, I could have done otherwise, which
Hmm.
basically is true. If they had wanted to do something different, then yes, they would have done that different thing. So I think it comes down to the control over wants. What do they have control over what they want?
Or it comes down to the fact that they couldn't have done otherwise than want the thing that they want as well. So the whole otherwise situation kind of leads backward in time, right? To each event. Each event couldn't have been otherwise.
Right,
Y-
but even if you go that route, then you would still have to explain why not being able to do otherwise, in the alternate decision, would not be possible. So again, you're going to like the other decision and then explaining why that's not possible because of the control.
Well, it's more explained via causality than the idea of control, I'd say.
Well, actually, that's, because I was going to start with causality, but think about it. Um, I think even with causality, we have to invoke the concept of control because, like, for example, if we were in control of causality, then certainly we would have a free will. So it's really just the fact that causality is not in our control.
Yeah, but
It
it's also the fact that for causality to be logical, it, it means that one event leads to the other event, and it can't lead to a different event because that's a contradictory causal variable. So it's the logic of causality that leads to the impossibility of alternate possibilities, basically. So in philosophy, there's also this concept called the principle of alternate possibilities, which basically says that if you couldn't have done otherwise, then you aren't morally responsible. There's no way of injecting moral responsibility if those other alternate possibilities weren't real, if you couldn't have actually ever reached them. So this is another reason why I like the otherwise thing, because it actually addresses the alternate possibilities not being there.
Well, I think you can apply the moral responsibility to the causality and control also. In other words, because we're not in control of our decisions, we can't be held fundamentally responsible. So, I think the morality issue is just like more of kind of like an implication of because we don't have free will, therefore, we're not, fundamentally morally responsible. But I think, it applies to both, to the otherwise and the control.
Yeah. But when people think about like having control, they don't think about like the variables that go back in time. They think about their conscious thoughts and their deliberations, and they're saying that if they had these conscious thoughts and these deliberations, then they were in control of those conscious thoughts and deliberations. So we have to actually stem backwards and say and show them why, well, they weren't really in control. And the same thing with the otherwise thing. So they both kind of depend on this whole causality situation where you couldn't have done otherwise, or you weren't in control because of causality. So either way, we kind of have to explain it the same way, I think. So the question is, which is more intuitive to people? If you tell them they couldn't have done otherwise, I think that's very intuitive. That if they couldn't have done otherwise, then that's pretty strong that they were forced to that one event. Whereas if you tell them they weren't in control, I think that they might battle that a little more. I don't know. I could be wrong on that.
Yeah, my fear is that, like, if you ask them whether they could have done otherwise, I think intuitively they would be much more prone to take the position that they could have, from that perspective, from the, theoretical perspective. And then once they do that, we're battling, they've established a position for themselves. And I think once they've established that, I think it's more difficult to pull them away from that. I think, who knows, maybe the issue of control has the same problem.
Yeah,
But
I think they both kind of have the same problem because obviously people's intuitions are they're A, in control, and B, they could have done otherwise. So
yeah.
we have kind of an uphill battle either way. So I'm not sure if we're going to actually come to a conclusion of which one is actually better in this situation. That's why I think it's kind of good that we use both kind of in maybe the better thing we could kind of assess is when is the best time to use one over the other. I'm not sure about that, like that. So
Yeah, I think that both ways of presenting it, both definitions, are really saying the same thing essentially, but the language of one might work with some people better than others because they'll understand it better.
Yeah, it may be when we're trying to establish the logical argument, it may be that the causality linked to the control might be a better way to start to kind of like just like pull them to focus them on what the actual issue will be. But then if we're starting with an emotional appeal, which we may need to, in other words, like the emotional appeal may actually be stronger than the logical argument, then perhaps the ability to have done otherwise, syncs better with a person's emotional understanding of themselves.
yeah, I'll tell you where I do like the control thing. The control thing does address both causality and indeterminism or acausality, even though we're right now we're just talking about a deterministic universe. But if you're saying that somebody doesn't have ultimate control, it doesn't matter whether that stems from acausal or causal events. They don't have control of those either way. So I kind of like that because the otherwise thing you have to qualify that by saying they couldn't have done otherwise, and if they could have done otherwise, that would have been up to the chooser for the definition. So you have to actually qualify it to address the indeterminism argument. Whereas the in control, you don't. It's automatically implicit in there. So I kind of like that about the in control part of it.
Another thing is I think it's very helpful to have examples rather than just talking abstractly, like, could you have done otherwise than you did, or were you in control of all the factors of your decision? It helps to use specific examples. Like, we've done that with obesity before. Like, did somebody choose to be overweight and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, we could use examples like, for example, voting, electing a president, um, because that's a fine example of something. What would it mean for somebody to freely will or freely choose between two candidates for president? What would that even look like?
Right. Well, Chandler, I think you make a good point, but like from the perspective of like, with something like a political decision, then we go back to like, the causes or, having done otherwise for it and all. But you when you said that, I was thinking that like, the example that I presented, I don't really like all that much. Because in other words, like I don't like the idea of somebody being in a restaurant and their drink being spiked. When philosophers love to kill people. I don't know if you ever like read the literature. They say, well, if one person kills another, they like these extreme kind of like negative examples. And I think those kinds of examples work against our intent, of creating a better world and all. So if we could come, like the value of the restaurant scenario and the crime is that like, Neil last week, I've used this, numerous times in my meetup events. It resonates with people. They get it. They understand the injustice of holding someone responsible for something that was not in their control. And from that, they can more easily understand why they don't have a free will. But if we could come up with a better example than that restaurant thing, that's a bit less, whatever, just a bit more positive.
Right. We need very relatable examples too. So that's why, we've used the obesity topic as examples. or we've used the sexuality thing as examples. We could use different political things that people vote on. We could use all sorts of different beliefs, like the fact that, you know, people do, what does it mean for someone to choose a religion or what they believe? How, you know what I mean? Because any of these things, these common examples we use, there's going to be causes. Well, why do you believe this? Why did you vote for that candidate?
Can you guys think of another like scenario where, like, other than the spiking the drink restaurant, where you present it to them, people will understand that. I mean, and I try not to go science fiction either. I try not to go like, well, a scientist implanted an electrode in their brain and all, because that's just like outside of our, common experience. But again, I think, in terms of winning the emotional argument and then leading people to understand, why, how causality makes free will impossible. I think starting there is a good strategy. But it'd be great if we had a more benign example.
Yeah, we I guess we need a silly example, one that's not doesn't have any emotional baggage tied with it. Because
Uh,
when if it gets into politics or religion, people do tend to not like those topics, I suppose. Um,
Trick, you
well,
were going to say something?
in yeah, in my book, I kind of made up like a fake example. I made an example of a serial tattooist. So what he does is he goes and knocks a person out, and he tattoos nasty things on their forehead. For example, just like a bad swear word or something like that. Um, and then that person wakes up and he has this thing tattooed on their forehead. So it would be like people blaming that person for putting that tattoo on their forehead.
Oh, well, that's good. But again, you have somebody knocking somebody out. How about have
Yeah.
can we think of something maybe like when somebody's asleep or something?
Yeah, we can
If
have him spike the drink. Yeah,
There was a
yeah,
so he
scenario.
knocks
wait,
him out.
There
go
was a
ahead, Michael.
scenario that I'm aware of that kind of has a moral issue. I'm not sure if it relates to the free will thing though, but it is something that's supposed to make it kind of ambiguous as to whether someone is morally guilty or not. Should I kind of mention it? It's not that long.
Sure, sure.
All right, so let me see if I can recall this correctly. So there's two people. Let's say two guys. Let's call one of them John and one of them Dave, right? And John doesn't like Dave. He wants him dead.
Hmm.
So
You're gonna kill off Dave already.
he's gonna kill Dave, and the best way he thinks of doing it is to poison Dave, because that'll make it look a little bit more natural. And so he goes to some weird drugstore that's off the beaten path, and he pays cash to buy some poison because he doesn't want to be traced. So he the next day he makes a salad for Dave, and he puts the poison in the salad, and he gives it to Dave. But unknown to John, the poison is so old that it's lost its potency, and it's no longer effective. So it has absolutely no effect whatsoever. So he put it in the salad. He gives it to Dave, and Dave eats the salad. And guess what happens? Dave
Nothing.
dies. Dave
Oh,
dies.
did that.
Dave
Okay.
dies. Dave dies. And the reason why Dave dies is because in the salad, the dressing that the person used had a peanut sauce in it that John used, and Dave is allergic to peanuts, and so he dies from the peanut sauce. And John didn't even know this. John had the intention to poison Dave with the poison that he bought, but it was ineffective. But Dave ultimately died from the peanut sauce that would have been in the salad anyway, even if he didn't even put the poison in. So is John guilty, morally guilty, of killing Dave?
The moral of the story is don't eat salads.
Yeah, with Michael, with that, yeah, I mean, like in a criminal case, I think, basically the guy would be guilty of attempted murder, you know.
But
Right.
how though? Because the poison was ineffective.
No, I know, but
Well,
how?
the
Because there was an intent. In other words, like intent is part of like the legal principle here. In other words, if he wanted to kill the person, I forget which day, whatever, and he tried. That's that's a crime. You can't try to kill people even if you fail.
There is another example of that story about two assassins who are following their target through a desert. And basically, the guy stops and he camps down for the night. And the first assassin comes along and he puts poison in the drinking water. And the second assassin comes along and he pokes a hole in the drinking water. And the next day, the guy wakes up and he dies of thirst. So, which assassin killed the guy?
Yeah, all right, because like guys, I appreciate the examples, but they're a bit kind of like they add. I mean, we could actually explore this on its own as a separate topic, but
Well,
Yeah,
they are
those are
relevant
just
because the
moral.
idea of moral responsibility, of like intent and those kinds of things, control of your will, does come into play when we want to assign moral guilt to someone.
no, I completely understand. But like what I was thinking of while you were saying that is like, for example, can we come up? I mean, are we aware of, let's say, any kind of food that affects us so much that would make us, do something we wouldn't ordinarily do?
There,
An
well,
agent
there's
in a food or
actually
something.
there's a virus. Not a virus. It's a parasite that is found that rats have. And this is in the one famous case that Daniel Dennett has talked about in his talks, and that is that when it goes into the rat, it changes the rat's neural chemistry, and it makes the rat or the mouse think that it's Mighty Mouse, and so the rat loses its sense of fear, and so it goes running out in the open, and what happens is it gets killed by a cat. The cat sees it as an easy target. And so, but the virus, or the parasite, what it's really trying to do is get into the stomach of the cat. That's its goal. And so it gets into the rat, and it makes the rat lose its inhibitions and its fear, and makes it run out in the open. So the cat eats it, and then the cat eats the rat or the mouse, and then the virus gets inside the cat's stomach, which is where the parasite wants to be. So there are lots of things in nature that do make you lose your inhibitions. Where I mean, if something like that went into a person, I'm not sure if it has the same effect on people as it does in mice. It might, but if something like that went into a person and they lost all their fear and inhibition and they started driving recklessly and killed somebody, you might say, well, they weren't morally responsible because they had this parasite that literally changed their neurochemical structure to not have any fear or make them lose their inhibitions, almost like being drunk.
Okay, yeah, so that works. Now that is there anything? Can we think of an example that perhaps because like yeah, I'm sure I'm not sure that many people they I think they can understand it conceptually, so it's good in that sense. But is there something maybe a stronger connection we might be able to come up with? I mean, it could be food, it could be something else, but that maybe that's not attributable to another person's actions.
Well, I think we need to come up with a food example because I think, yeah, I think what it gets down to is that, um, like, can a person be responsible, for all the ingredients contained in foods, or how can anybody, truly be in control of their preferences in food? Something I'm trying to come.
Right, but no, Chandler, we've got to be very direct. We can't like say like, for example, like some agents in food, maybe 5, 10 years from now, kind of like led to an effect. It's got to be pretty immediate and um, pretty precise, in
So
terms of its effect.
the problem with these type of scenarios is that most people, even people that say they believe in free will, would say, ah, well, those people didn't have free will at that time because of these variables that caused them to not have control. So somehow we have to get back to them that the it isn't necessarily those types of variables that create the lack of free will, but rather all variables, no matter if it's a chemically induced thing or just your regular brain state. And that's
Well, I
the
agree.
problem, I think,
And
as
that's
far
the
as I see.
second step. No, you're right, Trick. That's the second step. In other words, once like, going back to the spike drink, that's something that like, again, I've used this numerous times. I don't think anyone has has challenged it in terms of like they get it. They get that we can't really hold a person responsible for something. Now, another example that that might be more, more benign is okay, a person goes to a pharmacist for a pain reliever, and it's the person's understanding that the pain reliever is not supposed to cause any drowsiness. So the person then, takes the medicine, leaves the pharmacy, whatever, and drives home. And because of the drowsiness, just gets into a fender bender. Nobody's killed, whatever, but it's like,
He he kills Dave.
So all right, so like, so that would that is that something you guys think? And we should probably wrap this up somewhat soon. But does that sound um, realistic enough? Does that
It sounds to me like people would understand that they can't give that person free will.
Okay. All right. So again, like, so we've just started this, but let's just think about this. Let's try to figure out, and again, going back to
Yeah.
the original question, that I think, yeah, I think the answer is that there's different circumstances where one, approach, one definition of free will would be more advantageous for us to use than another, and we just got to think about, when to use them, with which, arguments, which kind of approach we're going to use.
Right,
Right.
because sorry, go ahead.
Another scenario is the which is a kind of a common one for the free will topic is the brain tumor scenario. So somebody gets a brain tumor that presses on certain part of their brain that causes them to act out in a certain way. Most people would say that person didn't have didn't have the control, weren't freely willing to do what they did. They had this brain tumor that was pressing on their brain, causing the action.
Yeah,
So
I like that. I like that, but like, there's a part of me that kind of like some people when you bring in brain tumors and stuff, it's kind of like killing people. It kind of like maybe intimidates people somewhat. People who are like squeamish about that or superstitious, whatever. I mean, it does present it, very clearly. I think even more clearly than the other ones. But again, we need to kind of like not create situations that are going to like make a person feel, very uncomfortable, or you know what I'm saying? I mean,
Yeah,
yeah,
and I'm still hoping that we come up with the ideal example related to the obesity thing, a perfect example. I just don't know what it is yet.
all right. So
there's
yeah,
just
we
too
probably
many variables is the problem, especially with obesity. There's just so many variables to account for that it's just hard to denote that to people.
yeah. All right, Chandler, we probably, again, we'll want to revisit this again, both in terms of like the various issues that, what Michael brought up about the requirements for free will and all, and just like, how best to present it. So, but maybe we want to get onto that, as the next topic. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So we should end this one then, shouldn't we?
Yep.
Okay. You've been listening to Free Will, Science, and Religion with Chandler Klebs, George Ortega, Trick Slattery, David Joseph, and Michael Walsh. And we talked a little bit about, which is a clear definition of free will. And then we tried to come up with different examples of things related to things being out of our control and moral responsibility. But we haven't come to a real conclusion about that yet. So we'll continue this in a future episode. Thank you for listening and goodbye.